last week I was relating the progress that was made in my career, being promoted through various stages, and I think the latest promotion when I met your mother was in 1957, December 7th, 1957. I was probably project engineer of passenger car, and may have just been appointed to that position, because here I was, I was just nonplussed, because I meet this beautiful exotic woman, and then I get a job where it means I'm going to have to travel a lot more. So the only way I could corral her is I'd date her up for every day I knew I was going to be home, and to ward off all interlopers. And I didn't know what she's doing on the off days when I was gone, like 3 or 4 days a week, but I found out much later that she's just trying to recover from exhaustion.
Yeah.
But it did, being appointed project engineer of passenger car did entail some more traveling, and particularly the Ford Motor Company, who was our biggest customer at that time. And we built power steering for cars. The power steering was not part of the steering mechanism itself as it is today. It was essentially an add-on thing, although the car was designed for this addition. It was a cylinder that hung underneath under the chassis, and it was attached to the linkage that turned the wheels. And the valve was too. It stuck off the end of the pitman arm, which was the arm that causes the front wheels to rotate left or right. And so essentially it was, most people called it an add-on, but it was designed into the vehicle to be that way. And we probably produced 1 million to 2 million units a year for Ford Motor Company at the time. And after the successful introduction of power steering, which people had for, I would say 2 or 3 years, on these heavy, Ford cars like Mercury's, the Mercury car, which weighed maybe 4,000 pounds or something, and you were able to steer into parking spaces with just a touch of your finger. They decided they were going to introduce what today you might call the soccer mom's car, a small, nifty little car that would be that Mom would use for her trips around town to do her shopping and deliver the kids. It was called the Ford Falcon, and it was a couple of feet shorter than their standard sedan. And the guy who was the project engineer at Ford gave press conferences where he'd say, no, this car won't need power steering because it's going to be so light that it'll be unnecessary. So that means it'll be more economical to buy, because you had to pay a couple $100 for the power steering.
Right.
And anyway, those of us who were in the power steering business chuckled at that, because we knew what you went from the beginning. First of all, you had to make the steering light in a non-power steered car. You had to add a high ratio. In other words, you had to turn the steering wheel many turns to go from right to left in order to reduce the force that it took to turn that wheel. And power steering cars were now using steering boxes, we'll call them, where the ratio was reduced because the power assist so dramatically reduced the force it took to turn the steering wheel that you could use a steering box that had a lower ratio. Like you could turn, for an example, a non-power steered car, you may take 3.5 turns to go from left to right stops. A power steering car may do that in 2 turns. So you had added maneuverability plus the ease of being able to do parking maneuvers and whatnot. So anyway, they came out with this Ford car, and it was, well, when the moms, the soccer moms start trying it out, they says, man, this is like driving a truck. I mean, they tried to keep the turns. They didn't put an extra high ratio gearbox so the turning would be light. Maybe they did slightly, but I can't recall that. But you know, the moms would come in and say, man, this car's like a truck. I can drive our big Mercury, you know, with one finger. And here I got to grab onto this thing and turn like mad. So the model year usually starts in October. And when we had heard this guy at a SAE function make this remark, the chief engineer or project engineer, SAE is a Society for Automotive Engineers. And you'll see up on the wall somewhere a plaque that I have for being a long outstanding member, and still am a member of it, in fact. He said that power steering was unnecessary. He responded to a question from somebody in the audience, and of course we heard him, and it was written up that way in the newspapers later on, because they had a reporter there that wrote on automotive news. But I think at that point in time I was acting chief engineer, so this might have been around 1963. When we got home, I held a little conference with a couple of our guys in the design room, and I said, you know, what do you think about this? You know, and we discussed with humor the statement that you won't need power steering because it's such a light car. And we said, boy, this guy's going to get shocked. And so I said to our guys, I said, why don't we see if we can plan ahead and see if we can lay out the power steering in the Ford Falcon, you know, see what kind of problems we're going to run into. And and it turned into be quite a, you know, one of these things that spurs the department on. You know, my designer, you know, he jumped right into it, you know, start working, and even wanted to work a little free overtime, you know, to get this going and whatnot, but not really. But, you know, it's that spirit that you get into. You're going to best the guy that thinks he doesn't need your product. And, you know, a couple other people jumped in, and we were able to, through our contact engineer, we were able to get drawings of the Ford Falcon linkage and steering mechanism, which was required in order to make our layouts. And this was before computers, of course, and you didn't have the ability to sweep through revolutions of movement as you do today in some of these computer programs that show interferences and possible problems. You had to do this all by hand, by geometrically drawing it and transferring it from one view to another, and it was a complicated thing for a designer to do. The designer that was doing it had done it on a couple other car models, so he was familiar with it. But as we progressed, we found it was quite a tough job of getting it in, but we found we could put a power steering unit into the vehicle. But more surprisingly was that when we went through Ford's own drawings, we found a sort of a glaring mistake that they had made in their wheel linkage arrangement. Well, when I say glaring, it wouldn't cause a car to flip over, but what it does, it would add to tire wear, reduce the life of the tire. And what this had to do was what is called a jounce and rebound condition of the car. In other words, if you were to push down on the hood of the car as hard as you could till the wheel came into contact with the chassis, or the mechanical linkage came in contact with jounce, Jounce, and rebound. Jounce is where, if you could imagine going over a rock in a road, the wheel moves up. The front wheel moves up, sort of buries itself into the fender cover, and then the reverse of that is where your wheel falls into a big hole. The wheel just drops down away from the car. It traverses through that range normally, and it has the potential to traverse through that entire range. When it runs over a rock till it bangs on a stop, they actually have rubber stops, you might say, where it goes up so far, then it hits the chassis, and from that point on, the chassis moves up with the wheel, or down. It allows the linkage to just hang free if there's a big enough hole. And while it's going through this jounce and rebound condition, depending on whether you're going straight ahead or slightly turned, you plot the effect of this on the steered linkage. And you could see that as the wheel went up, as say the left wheel went up to a high position, it's changing the linkage length, the apparent linkage length between the left wheel and the right wheel, because of this radius that it goes through. And if this radius is beyond a certain degree, as this wheel is traversing this path, it causes one or the other wheels to twist, because it's shortening or lengthening that apparent radius between left and right wheel. Or you would notice it as the wheel fighting you, the steering wheel jerking out of your hand, so to speak. Well, in studying the power steering installation, we have to examine all these positions in full left, full right, up and down, to make sure we're not interfering with any parts of the steering mechanism or the chassis when the linkage is going through these actions, because we're hanging our valve and our cylinder on these external parts, and we have to make sure they don't rub on anything when these parts are slopping around like this as you go over a bumpy road, or turning as you're going over a bumpy road. Well, we found out in this study that somebody had not done a very good job of laying it out, and they had to do it the same way we were doing it, because they didn't have computers either. They depended on their layout man to examine these positions, and we found that they would be having a considerable wheel fight because of the way the linkage was changing apparent length as it went from jounce to rebound. So we just kept that in our noggin as we waited till we got the call. And what I mean by that is that we expected that within a certain number of months after car introduction, that somebody's going to call up somebody and say, can you get power steering on the car? And we wanted to be ready, and we were ready. I mean, we didn't have a model, built, but we had all the design work done. And when that call came, and it was like at a high level at Ford to somebody at a high level at Bendix,
right?
Could would you guys look into putting power steering on? And of course, whoever it was, high level at Bendix, called our sales department, and when they called us, well, we said, well, why don't you come over and look at our design? We're all done with it, you know. And, you know, it flabbergasted.
Yeah, we've got a Cray supercomputer in back of here, and we between the time you rang the call and we got it, we cranked it into the machine.
So anyway, we really came out smelling like a rose, and of course we eventually went on into production building the thing, and Ford was very appreciative that we'd found the mistake in their linkage and just putting power steering on, which virtually was 100%, because, you know, nobody liked to drive that car. I don't think they sold many after they got it going, because the moms were saying, I can drive our big Mercury, you know, with one finger, and I got to pull, you know, like driving a truck, you know. That did turn out actually that way. And it was written up, I think, in newspapers, too, that, you know, that was the complaint. And, of course, when it hit the news, the press, you know, the project engineer who made that statement didn't have a leg to stand on. He was, you know, he was dead meat then. So anyway, that was the saga of the